The conference hall floated in the darkness between star systems, a massive structure built by 1,000 different species working together. Inside, representatives from across the galaxy gathered around a circular table that seemed to stretch forever. Each seat held a different form of life, some breathing oxygen, others methane, some existing as pure energy contained in special fields. Thalvan stood at the center podium, his 6 eyes gleaming with excitement. He was from the Krethix Empire, a species that looked like massive insects covered in metallic plates. His claws clicked against the stone floor as he moved, and his voice echoed through translation devices that turned his chittering into words every species could understand. Honored council members, he began, my empire has discovered something remarkable. In the outer spiral arm, there is a star system rich with resources beyond measure. The third planet alone contains rare minerals we haven't seen in abundance for centuries. The fourth planet, the red one, has deposits of element 237 that could power our civilization for millennia. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Resources were always scarce. Species fought wars over far less than what Thalvan described. But, an old representative, her body resembling flowing water held together by an environmental suit, raised one appendage. What of the warnings? She asked, her voice like rain on metal. Thalvan waved a dismissive claw. Ancient superstition. The system has navigational markers in a dead language. Some previous civilization marked it as forbidden, but they are long extinct. We've scanned the system extensively. There is one inhabited planet, the third one, with primitive life forms. Their technology is centuries behind ours. They pose no threat. The council debated for hours, but ultimately agreed one over caution. The Krethix Empire received permission to begin mining operations. Thalvan left the chamber satisfied, already planning which planets to strip first. Far across the galaxy, on a moon orbiting a giant ringed planet, Commander Hyunwoo sat in a small observation room. Through the window, he could see the gas giants swirling storms, beautiful and terrible. Saturn had been his home for 70 years, though he had only been awake for 10 of them. The rest of the time, he slept in suspended animation, along with his crew. The monitoring station on Titan was small, housing only 12 people at any given time. Their job was simple, watch the sensors, maintain the equipment, and wait. They were the last guardians of a sleeping civilization, the final warning system for a species that had chosen to step back from the stars. Commander, Lieutenant Jaiwan called from her station. She was young, only 25 when she volunteered for this duty. That was 80 years ago, but suspended animation kept her body the same age. I'm picking up something on long-range sensors. Multiple ships, heading in system. Hyunwoo moved to her console, his heart already sinking. How many? 50. No, wait. 75. They're big, Commander. Military escort formation surrounding what looked like industrial vessels. He closed his eyes. After 200 years, someone had finally ignored the warnings. Someone had decided that whatever resources the Sol system contained were worth the risk. Are they heading for Earth? He asked quietly. No, sir. Trajectory indicates Mars. They're going to Mars. That was almost worse. Mars held the memorial sites, the monuments to humanity's first steps off their homeworld. Those sites were sacred, maintained by automated systems because no living human could bear to visit them anymore. They represented hope from a time before humanity learned what it truly was. Hyunwoo returned to his office and opened a locked cabinet. Inside was a communication device that hadn't been used in 2 centuries. His hand trembled as he activated it. The encryption protocols initialized, connecting to relay stations scattered throughout the outer solar system, then bouncing to Earth itself. On Earth, in a city called Geneva, Dr. Minji worked alone in the archives. The building was old, constructed during the last days before the Great Sleep. Its walls held the complete history of humanity, every war, every peace, every triumph and tragedy recorded in perfect detail. The archive was nearly empty. Most of Earth's population slept in vast underground facilities, their bodies preserved in stasis while automated systems maintained the planet. Only a few thousand people remained awake at any time, rotating in shifts to ensure someone was always watching, always remembering. Minji was cataloging records from the final war when the alarm sounded. She had never heard it before, but she knew immediately what it meant. Someone had triggered the emergency protocols. Someone had given humanity a reason to wake up. She ran to the communication center, her footsteps echoing in empty hallways. The message from Titan was brief and devastating. Alien vessels had entered the solar system. They were mining Mars. They were destroying the memorials. Minji accessed the protocols written 200 years ago by people who understood what humanity was capable of. The instructions were clear. If anyone disturbed the Sol system, if anyone threatened Earth or desecrated the memorial sites, the sleeping billions would be awakened. Humanity would remember what it had tried so hard to forget. She entered the authorization codes with shaking hands. Across the planet, in hidden facilities beneath Seoul, Tokyo, New York, Moscow, and 100 other cities, awakening sequences began. Massive machines hummed to life, warming stasis chambers that held billions of sleeping humans. The process would take weeks, but it had begun. Meanwhile, on Mars, the Krethix mining ships landed near Olympus Mons. Their drills bit into the red soil, extracting precious minerals without care for what they destroyed. Ancient plaques bearing messages in dozens of human languages crumbled under their machines. Statues commemorating the first human colony dissolved into dust. War Master Kelvin watched from his command ship in orbit. He was a veteran of a dozen campaigns, his armor decorated with honors from countless victories. To him, this was a simple resource extraction mission. The primitive inhabitants of the third planet hadn't even attempted to contact them. They were probably too frightened or too primitive to understand what was happening. "Sir," his communications officer called. "We're receiving a transmission from the third planet." "Ignore it," Kelvin said dismissively. "Probably a surrender offer or a plea for mercy. Continue operations." But the message kept coming, repeating on every frequency. Finally, annoyed, Kelvin had it played. A human face appeared on the screen. Male, dark hair, eyes that held depths Kelvin couldn't quite read. The human spoke calmly, his words translated by their systems. "This is Ambassador Doyen of Earth. You have entered the Sol system without authorization and damaged protected sites on Mars. Under the preservation protocols established by our ancestors, we demand immediate withdrawal and full reparations. You have 24 hours to comply. This is your only warning." Kelvin laughed, a harsh chittering sound. One planet demanding that the Krethix Empire withdraw. Ridiculous. He cut the transmission and ordered the mining to continue at triple speed. Let the primitives send more messages. Words couldn't stop progress. But, in the depths of Earth's oceans, in hidden bunkers beneath mountains, in facilities on the moon and, scattered across the asteroid belt, something ancient and terrible was stirring. Humanity was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why some species should never be disturbed. The first humans to wake were the military personnel. In a facility carved deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, Captain Yunhee opened her eyes for the first time in 200 years. The stasis chamber drained its preserving fluid, and she took her first gasping breath of real air. Her body ached, her mind felt fuzzy, but her training kicked in immediately. Around her, 50 other chambers were opening. Her crew, the people she had trained with, fought with, and, finally, chose to sleep with when humanity decided to step back from the stars. They had all volunteered for the same reason: if humanity ever needed to fight again, they wanted to be ready. Medical staff, awakened hours earlier, helped each person out of their chamber. Yun-hee stood on shaky legs and accepted a warm robe. A doctor checked her vital signs and nodded approval. The process had worked perfectly. She was exactly as she had been 2 centuries ago, just moments after stepping into the chamber. "Captain," a young lieutenant said, offering her a tablet. "These are your orders." Yun-hee read them quickly, her expression hardening with each line. Alien vessels had entered the Sol system. They had ignored warnings. They had destroyed human memorials on Mars. And, now Earth needed its defenders. "How long until we can move?" she asked. 72 hours for full combat readiness," the doctor replied. "But, your ship is already being prepped." The automated systems kept everything in perfect condition. Yun-hee smiled grimly. The UNS Indomitable had been her home before the Great Sleep. She was one of 50 dreadnoughts built during humanity's final wars, when every nation on Earth united to build weapons capable of ending worlds. The ships had never fired on each other. Instead, they became symbols of what humanity could accomplish when working together, and what they could destroy if they chose to fight. On the moon, in a facility hidden inside a crater on the far side, other ships were awakening. Crews moved through corridors that hadn't seen human footsteps in centuries. They ran diagnostics on weapons systems that had been built to last forever, waiting patiently for a threat that justified their existence. Commander Hyun-woo arrived from Titan 3 days later, his small shuttle docking with the main lunar facility. He met with Admiral Ji-hun, a man who had been promoted while still in stasis, chosen by automated systems to lead Earth's defense based on his military record and psychological profile. "Show me what we're dealing with," Ji-hun said without preamble. Hyun-woo brought up the tactical display. The Krethix fleet had grown since first entering the system. More ships arrived daily, setting up mining operations not just on Mars but on several asteroids and one of Jupiter's moons. "They're not even trying to hide what they're doing," Hyun-woo said. "It's like they don't consider us a threat at all." "Good," Ji-hun replied. "Let them underestimate us. How long until our ships are ready?" "The Indomitable and 12 others are already operational. The rest will be ready within the week." Ji-hun studied the display, his eyes calculating distances and angles. He had been a chess master before becoming a military officer, known for thinking 10 moves ahead. Now he was planning humanity's opening move in a game the aliens didn't even know they were playing. Meanwhile, on the Galactic Council station, Ambassador Doyen stood before the assembled representatives for the second time. Unlike his first message, which had been delivered remotely, he had traveled here in person aboard a human diplomatic vessel. His arrival had caused quite a stir. The ship was small, unarmed, but it had covered the distance in a fraction of the time it should have taken. "Members of the Council," Doyen said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "I am here to formally protest the Krethix Empire's invasion of our system. We gave them 24 hours to withdraw. That deadline has passed. They have continued their illegal mining operations and destroyed sites of cultural significance to my people." Thalvan rose from his seat, his mechanical voice filled with contempt. "Your protest is noted and dismissed. The Council granted my empire the rights to develop that system. One primitive planet has no authority to challenge our claim." "Then, perhaps you need to understand exactly how primitive we are," Doyen said. He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The images showed Earth's history. Not the peaceful parts, not the art and culture and scientific achievement. Doyen showed them the wars. Every war, from the earliest recorded conflicts to the final war that nearly destroyed the planet. He showed them nuclear weapons detonating over cities. Biological weapons that killed millions. Artificial intelligences that turned on their creators. Ships that could crack planets. Weapons that made stars go nova. "This is what we did to ourselves," Doyen said quietly. This is why we isolated ourselves, why we put warnings around our system in every language we could think of. We weren't protecting ourselves from you. We were protecting you from us. The council chamber fell silent. Even Thalvan seemed taken aback by the images. But, he recovered quickly, his mandibles clicking in what might have been laughter. Ancient history, he said. You clearly gave up such barbarism long ago. Otherwise, you would have attacked our fleet already instead of sending messages and protests. We gave up such barbarism because we chose to, Doyen said. We made a conscious decision to step back, to sleep, to give the galaxy peace from what we are capable of. But, you've made it clear that our choice is not being respected. So now we will show you why the warnings exist. He left the chamber without waiting for dismissal, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Surely the human was bluffing. Surely no species would actually choose to isolate themselves just because they were too dangerous to their neighbors. Back in the Sol system, Captain Yunhee sat in the command chair of the Indomitable, feeling the ship hum with power around her. The dreadnought was massive, over 3 kilometers long and, bristling with weapons that most galactic species had never conceived of. Behind her, 12 more ships formed up in attack formation. All ships report ready, her tactical officer announced. Target? Yunhee asked. The Krethix main fleet is stationed near Jupiter. 75 combat vessels, twice that many support ships. Admiral Juhun's orders. Engage and destroy. Show no mercy. Make them understand their mistake. Yunhee felt a familiar coldness settle over her. She had felt it before, during the wars that humanity fought against itself. The moment when training took over, when emotion stepped aside, and, she became a weapon as much as the ship she commanded. All ships, she said into the fleet channel, her voice steady and clear, this is Captain Yunhee. We are engaging the enemy. Remember what they destroyed. Remember why we slept. Remember that we gave them every chance to leave peacefully. Now we remind the galaxy why humanity went quiet. Attack Pattern Delta. Execute. The 13 human dreadnoughts accelerated toward Jupiter, their engines leaving trails of distorted space behind them. On the Krethix flagship, sensors detected the approaching vessels and, War Master Kelvin was alerted. Only 13 ships, he said, amused. Against 75? The humans are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. His tactical officer wasn't so certain. Sir, those ships are reading energy signatures far beyond what we expected. Their engines alone are producing more power than our entire fleet combined. Impossible, Kelvin said. They're primitives. Probably just trying to appear more threatening than they are. All ships, battle formation. Let's end this quickly and get back to mining. The Krethix fleet moved to intercept, confident in their numerical superiority. They had fought and won 100 battles against a dozen different species. They had never lost. But, they had never fought humans before. The battle began at exactly 1437 Earth Standard Time. The human dreadnoughts closed to weapons range and opened fire without warning, without final ultimatums, without mercy. Captain Yunhee had been given her orders. Show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. Make them understand the mistake they had made. The first weapon to fire was something the Krethix had never seen before. A gravity lance, a focused beam that manipulated the fundamental force holding matter together. The Indomitable's main gun fired once, and the Krethix battleship it targeted simply collapsed into itself, crushed by its own mass multiplied 1,000 times over. The implosion created a miniature black hole that existed for 3 seconds before evaporating, but, in those 3 seconds, it consumed 5 more ships that had been in close formation. Target destroyed, the weapons officer reported calmly. 6 additional kills from gravitational collapse. Yunhee felt nothing. She had done this before, during the wars when humans fought humans. She had fired weapons that killed thousands in an instant. The only difference now was that the targets weren't her own species. Somehow, that made it easier. Continue firing. All weapons, free engagement. The other 12 dreadnoughts opened fire. Rail guns that accelerated projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Particle beams that ionized anything they touched. Missiles that phased through shields and exploded inside enemy hulls. And, more exotic weapons, things that humanity had invented during their darkest hours. The Krethix fleet tried to fight back. Their plasma cannons fired, their missiles launched, their energy shields activated. But, human technology was different. It wasn't built for fairness or honor or following the conventions of galactic warfare. It was built during a time when humanity expected to fight itself to extinction, when every weapon needed to be devastating enough to end the war quickly. War Master Kelvin watched in horror as his fleet dissolved around him. Ships that had served the Empire for decades vanished in bursts of light. Entire squadrons went dark as human electronic warfare systems took control of their computers. Some ships simply stopped, floating dead in space as if their crews had vanished. He would learn later that those ships had been hit by neural disruptors, weapons that shut down all brain activity within a certain radius. The crews were dead, their minds literally turned off like machines. "Retreat," he ordered, his voice breaking. "All ships, retreat." But, retreat wasn't easy. The human ships were faster, more maneuverable. They pursued the fleeing Krethix vessels like wolves chasing wounded deer. Captain Yunhee watched her tactical display with cold satisfaction as the enemy scattered in all directions. "Let them run," she said. "Cease fire once they're clear of Jupiter's orbit. We've made our point." The battle lasted 17 minutes from first shot to final retreat. The Krethix Empire lost 63 warships and over 200 support vessels. Thousands of crew members dead. The human fleet suffered 0 casualties, 0 damage beyond some superficial scoring on their armor. On Earth, in the command center beneath Geneva, Admiral Jihun reviewed the battle recordings. He had expected victory, but not this complete. The look on his face was not triumph, but sadness. This was what humanity was good at. This was why they had chosen to sleep. "Send the recordings to the Galactic Council," he ordered. "Let them see what happened. Let them understand what we're capable of." The recordings spread across the galaxy faster than light, carried by FTL communication relays. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly knew their name. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, the chamber filled with fear and anger and confusion. Representative Miho stood before them, newly arrived from Earth. He wore an old military uniform, the chest covered in medals from wars the Council had never heard of. Battles fought on Earth, on Mars, in the asteroid belt. Conflicts where millions died in hours. He was 60 years old when he went into stasis. He was 60 years old now, his mind filled with memories of humanity's worst moments. "Members of the Council," Miho said, his voice quiet but, carrying through the silent chamber, "what you just witnessed was not our military at full strength. That was 13 ships out of 50. That was humanity being restrained, showing mercy by allowing retreat. We did not pursue the fleeing vessels beyond Jupiter's orbit. We did not destroy their mining facilities. We did not strike at their home worlds, though we know exactly where they are." Thalvan, his carapace cracked and, bleeding from stress, rose shakily to his feet. "You have violated every law of galactic warfare. You used prohibited weapons. You showed no honor." "We never agreed to your laws," Miho replied. "We never joined your council. We specifically isolated ourselves to avoid situations exactly like this. You came to our home. You destroyed our sacred sites. You ignored our warnings. And now you complain that we defended ourselves too effectively. An elderly representative, her species resembling crystalline structures that rang like bells when she spoke, addressed Miho with something like awe. Why did you isolate yourselves? If you possessed such power, you could have dominated the galaxy. Miho smiled sadly. Because we've been there. We've done that. We conquered ourselves, built empires, watched them fall. We fought wars that left our planet glowing with radiation. We built weapons that made our children weep. We created intelligence that surpassed us and, then, had to fight it for survival. We did everything, tried everything, destroyed everything. And, when we finally stopped, when we finally achieved real peace, we looked at what we had become and were horrified. He activated another holographic display, but this one didn't show weapons or battles. It showed Earth. Cities where millions lived in peace. Forests that had regrown over the scars of ancient wars. Oceans cleaned of pollution. Children playing in parks built over old battlefields. This is what we chose, Miho said. Peace. Real peace, not just the absence of war but the presence of something better. We didn't want to inflict our history on the galaxy. We didn't want you to learn the lessons we learned. We put up warnings, we isolated ourselves, we went to sleep hoping you would just leave us alone. The council chamber was silent. Finally, the crystalline representative spoke again. What do you want from us? Reparations for the damage to Mars. Full withdrawal from the Sol system. Recognition of our borders and our sovereignty. And, most importantly, new laws. Warning markers must be respected. Systems marked as restricted must remain so. What happened to us should never happen to anyone else, human or alien. On the Krethix homeworld, emergency council meetings were being held. The Empire had just suffered its worst military defeat in history, at the hands of a species they had dismissed as primitive. Voices called for revenge, for mobilizing the full Imperial fleet, for calling on their allies. But, other voices, wiser ones, pointed out the obvious. If 13 human ships could destroy 75 of their best warships in 17 minutes, what could 50 do? What could 500 do? The humans had showed restraint by letting survivors escape. They had shown mercy by not pursuing the war to the Krethix homeworld. That mercy might not be offered twice. The Empire voted to accept Earth's terms. They would withdraw, pay reparations, and, most importantly, they would spread the word to every species they had contact with. There was a system in the outer spiral arm. It was marked with warnings in a dead language. Those warnings were not superstition. They were the truth. Humanity slept there, and it was best for everyone if they stayed asleep. Back on Earth, Dr. Minji watched the news broadcasts with mixed feelings. The humans who had awakened for the battle would return to stasis soon. The military crews, the ships, all of it would go back to sleep once the crisis passed. But, something had changed. The galaxy knew about Earth now. They knew what humans could do. She returned to the archives and added new entries to the historical record. The Battle of Jupiter. The day humanity woke up. The day the galaxy learned there were worse things than their usual wars. She wrote it all down, every detail, every casualty, every weapon used. Future generations needed to know. They needed to remember why humanity chose isolation, and what happened when that isolation was broken. Outside her window, the sun set over Geneva. The city was quiet, peaceful. Most of Earth's population still slept, unaware of the battle that had been fought in their name. Perhaps it was better that way. Perhaps some burdens were meant to be carried by the few, so the many could dream of better days. 3 weeks after the Battle of Jupiter, the Krethix Empire made a decision that would change galactic history. Emperor Thulkar, desperate to restore his empire's honor and, unwilling to accept defeat from a single planet, sent encrypted messages to the Vorthan Collective, the Skarn Swarms, and 15 other spacefaring species. The message was simple: join us in crushing humanity, or watch as they eventually come for you too. The response was overwhelming. Species that had never met humans, that knew them only from the battle recordings, agreed to join the crusade. Some joined out of fear, believing that humanity would eventually conquer the galaxy if left unchecked. Others joined for profit, hoping to claim Earth's resources for themselves. Still others joined simply because the Krethix Empire promised them territory and trade rights. Within 2 weeks, the largest military force in recorded history assembled at the edge of the Sol system. 5,000 warships from a dozen different species, each bringing their own weapons, their own tactics, their own reasons for fighting. The fleet was so massive it took 3 days just to organize into formations. Admiral Jihun watched the enemy fleet gather, his expression unreadable. He stood in the command center deep beneath Geneva, surrounded by holographic displays showing every ship, every formation, every tactical possibility. Around him, his staff worked quietly, running simulations, calculating odds. "Admiral," a young officer said hesitantly, "they outnumber us almost 400 to 1. Even with our technological advantage, the numbers are overwhelming." Jihun nodded slowly. He had expected this. One battle was never going to be enough. The galaxy had thousands of species, millions of ships. If they all united against Earth, even human technology couldn't overcome such odds through conventional warfare. "Implement Ghost Protocol," he said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what Ghost Protocol meant. It was humanity's final contingency, the strategy they had developed during their darkest hours when extinction seemed inevitable. It wasn't conventional warfare. It wasn't even unconventional warfare. It was something else entirely, something that blurred the line between battle and horror. "Sir," the young officer said, "Ghost Protocol has never been tested in actual combat. The simulations suggest it will be effective, but also that it will be terrifying." Jihun finished. "Yes. That's the point. The Krethix saw what we can do when we fight fair. Now they need to see what happens when we don't." Across Earth's orbital facilities, in hidden stations throughout the solar system, new ships awakened. These weren't dreadnoughts like the Indomitable. They were smaller, faster, built for a different kind of war. Ghost ships, they were called during the final war. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, that could phase through solid matter, that couldn't be detected by conventional sensors. Captain Teijin sat in the pilot seat of his fighter craft, feeling the dimensional drive hum around him. He was young when he volunteered for the Ghost Corps, barely 20. That was 150 years ago. Now he was leading a squadron of 50 fighters against an enemy fleet that outnumbered them 100,000 to 1. "All Ghost Squadron pilots," he said into the comm system, "remember your training. We're not here to win a fair fight. We're here to make them afraid to sleep at night. Attack Pattern Omega. Execute at will." The ghost ships phased into higher dimensional space and vanished from all sensors. To the alien fleet, they simply stopped existing. One moment there were 50 small human craft on their screens, the next moment there was nothing. The Allied fleet moved into the Sol system confidently. They had the numbers, they had the firepower, and they had learned from the Krethix defeat. Their shields were upgraded, their formations spread out to avoid gravity weapons, their electronic warfare systems hardened against human hacking. They were ready. They were not ready. The first ship to die was a Vorthan battlecruiser. It was in the middle of the fleet, surrounded by defensive pickets, its shields at maximum strength. Without warning, it exploded from the inside, as if something had appeared within its hull and detonated. There was no missile impact, no energy signature, no indication of any attack. It was just there, and then, it was gone. Then, another ship exploded. And, another. Ships scattered throughout the fleet, no pattern, no warning. The Allied commanders tried to respond, but, how do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you defend against attacks that come from inside your own vessels? Captain Teijin pulled his fighter out of phase space just long enough to fire a quantum torpedo into a Skarn carrier, then, phased back before their weapons could lock onto him. The torpedo existed in a state of quantum uncertainty until it impacted, meaning it couldn't be intercepted or detected. It phased through the carrier's shields and armor, materializing inside the ship's power core. The explosion was spectacular. Across the battlefield, Ghost fighters repeated the same tactic. Appear, fire, vanish. The Allied fleet couldn't target them, couldn't track them, couldn't defend against them. Their shields were useless because the human ships weren't trying to get through the shields. They were simply bypassing them by existing in different dimensional space. But, that was only part of Ghost Protocol. The other part was worse. Human ships deployed neural weapons, devices that shut down brain activity in a specific radius. But, these weren't the simple disruptors used at Jupiter. These were networked, AI-controlled, designed to target specific species based on their neural patterns. Entire ships went dark as their crews simply stopped thinking, their brains turned off like a switch had been flipped. Then, came the quantum viruses. Human AI systems had been fighting each other for centuries during Earth's wars, evolving into something far beyond what most galactic species understood. Now those AI weapons were unleashed on the Allied fleet. Ships turned on each other as their control systems were hijacked. Weapons fired at random. Life support shut down. Some ships just drifted away, their computers now running human code that told them to leave the battlefield and never return. War Master Kelden, commanding the Krethix portion of the Allied fleet from a heavily shielded flagship, watched his second defeat unfold. His first defeat had been swift and decisive. This one was slow and terrifying. His ships weren't being destroyed in glorious battle. They were being turned off, taken over, made irrelevant. It was like fighting ghosts, like fighting nightmares. All ships, he broadcast on the emergency channel, retreat immediately. This is not a battle we can win. But, retreat wasn't simple. The human ships were everywhere and, nowhere, appearing to attack fleeing vessels, vanishing before retaliation came. The Allied fleet broke apart in panic, ships fleeing in all directions, formations dissolving into chaos. On Earth, civilians who had awakened to support the war effort watched the battle on news broadcasts. Many were horrified. This wasn't the clean, decisive victory at Jupiter. This was something darker, more disturbing. This was humanity using weapons they had promised never to use again, tactics they had sworn to abandon. President Yoonji addressed the planet from the United Nations building in New York. She looked tired, older than her years, burdened by decisions that no one should have to make. My fellow humans, she said, her voice heavy with emotion, I know many of you are troubled by what you're seeing. I am troubled too. We developed these weapons during our darkest hours, and, we hoped never to use them again. But, an enemy fleet 5,000 ships strong sits at our doorstep, intent on our destruction. We didn't choose this war. We tried to avoid it. We isolated ourselves specifically to prevent this. But, now that it's here, now that they've forced this fight, we will win it with every tool at our disposal. She paused, gathering her thoughts. After this is over, after the threat has passed, we will hold a reckoning. We will judge ourselves for what we've done here. We will add it to our history, to the long list of things we're not proud of. But, we will survive. And, we will make sure the galaxy learns this lesson, leave humanity alone. The battle for Seoul continued for 3 days. Not because the humans needed 3 days to win, but, because the Allied fleet was so large it took that long to drive them all away. By the end, over 4,000 Allied ships had been destroyed, disabled, or captured. The rest fled in disarray, spreading stories of ghost ships and invisible weapons and AI that could think faster than biological minds. The galactic community received the recordings with a mixture of awe and terror. This wasn't just military superiority. This was something else, something that challenged the fundamental rules of how wars were supposed to be fought. Humanity didn't just have better weapons. They had weapons that other species couldn't even conceptualize, based on theories and technologies that seemed like magic. And, the most terrifying part, they had been holding back. They had showed restraint. They could have pursued the fleeing ships to their home worlds. They could have turned their neural weapons on planetary populations instead of just ship crews. They could have done so much worse. The galaxy finally understood. The warnings around Sol weren't ancient superstition. They were mercy, given by a species trying to protect others from itself. 6 months after the battle for Sol, the Galactic Council convened for what would be remembered as the Treaty of Terra. The massive conference hall that once held proud representatives now hosted a much more subdued gathering. Many seats were empty. Some species had withdrawn from galactic affairs entirely after witnessing what humanity could do. Others sent representatives but kept them quiet, afraid to draw attention. Representative Miho stood at the center podium once again, but this time the council wasn't laughing at him. They weren't dismissing his warnings or threatening his people. They were listening with the kind of attention that comes from genuine fear mixed with genuine respect. The terms are simple, Miho said, distributing holographic documents to each representative. Full reparations from the Krethix Empire and all species that joined their attack. The amount is calculated based on the resources we expended defending ourselves, plus compensation for the Mars memorials that were destroyed. Thalvan, his carapace now permanently cracked from stress, nodded weakly. Agreed. Second, Miho continued, formal recognition of the Sol system as sovereign human territory. A buffer zone extending 5 light-years in all directions will be established. No non-human ship may enter this zone without explicit permission from Earth's government. Violation of this boundary will be considered an act of war. The crystalline representative chimed softly. 5 light-years is an enormous claim. It's non-negotiable, Miho replied. We tried a smaller buffer. We tried just warning markers. You ignored them. Now we're making sure there's enough space that any violation must be intentional. The council voted. The measure passed unanimously. No one wanted to test humanity's resolve again. Third, Miho said, the Galactic Council will establish new laws regarding restricted systems. Warning markers must be respected. Species have the right to isolate themselves. The Council will not grant mining rights or development permissions for any system marked as restricted without verification that the markings are indeed obsolete. This was harder for the Council to accept. It meant admitting their failure, codifying their mistake into law. But, they voted yes. The alternative was worse. Finally, Miho said, his voice softening slightly, Earth offers the galaxy a choice. We can remain isolated, feared, the monsters you tell your children about to keep them from wandering into dark space. Or we can join you. Share our knowledge, our culture, our technology. Become part of the galactic community as equals, not conquerors. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Join them? After everything that had happened? Why would you want to join us? Someone asked. Because, Miho said, isolation is not living. It's hiding. We chose it because we thought it was the best way to protect you from our violent nature. But, these past months have taught us something. You needed protection, yes, but, not from our violence. You needed protection from your own assumptions, your own greed, your own refusal to respect boundaries. We tried to solve that by removing ourselves. It didn't work. He brought up new holographic displays, these showing not weapons or battles but art, music, literature, scientific discoveries. This is also what humanity is. We're not just weapons and warfare. We're dreamers, creators, explorers. We've been hiding that side of ourselves along with our capacity for violence. Maybe it's time we stopped hiding entirely. The vote took 3 days of debate. Species argued among themselves, formed coalitions, sought assurances. In the end, humanity was invited to join the Galactic Council as a full-member species, with one condition: they would never deploy Ghost Protocol or other dimensional warfare technologies offensively. Those weapons would be kept purely for defense of the Sol system. Earth accepted the terms. On Earth, President Yunji stood before a gathering of newly awakened citizens. The stasis facilities were opening permanently now. Humanity was waking up, all of it, ready to rejoin galactic civilization. But, many were conflicted about what had happened. "We're monsters," someone in the crowd shouted. "We proved it. We used weapons that turn off people's minds. We built machines that exist in multiple dimensions just to kill more efficiently. We're exactly what we were afraid we were." Yunji nodded slowly. "Yes. We did those things. We are capable of those things. But, we're also capable of choosing not to. We developed those weapons centuries ago, and, then, we chose to never use them. We kept that choice for 200 years. We only broke it when we were attacked, when peaceful solutions failed, when our survival was threatened." She paused, looking out at the crowd. Humanity's gift and curse is that we can imagine the worst possible things and, then, build them. But, we can also imagine better things and build those too. We can create weapons that end worlds, or we can create art that celebrates them. We can wage war, or we can make peace. We're not locked into one path. We choose, every single day, what we want to be. In the archives of Geneva, Dr. Minji added final entries to the historical record. The Battle of Jupiter. The Siege of Sol. The Treaty of Terra. She wrote it all down in careful detail, making sure future generations would know exactly what happened and why. But, she also added something new. A section on what happened after. How humanity, given the chance to dominate the galaxy through force, chose instead to join as equals. How they shared their technology carefully, teaching other species not just how to build advanced weapons but how to choose not to use them. How they became teachers, diplomats, artists, scientists, explorers. "We're still dangerous," she wrote in her final entry. "That will never change. But, we're dangerous the way a scalpel is dangerous. It can cut, it can harm, but, in the right hands it can also heal. We've learned to be the right hands. We've learned to choose." Commander Hyunwoo returned to Titan, but, his small monitoring station was transformed. No longer just 12 people watching sensors, it was now a bustling diplomatic post where human and alien staff worked side by side. Ambassador Doyen had requested him personally, saying they needed someone who remembered why humanity isolated themselves to help make sure they never needed to do it again. Lieutenant Jaiwan, promoted to commander, worked beside him. Together they trained the new generation of watchers, people whose job was no longer just to watch for threats but to build relationships, to prevent conflicts before they started, to make sure the warnings around Seoul would never be needed again. Captain Yunhee refused promotion to admiral. She remained with the Indomitable, but the ship's mission changed. Instead of a weapon waiting to be used, it became an explorer vessel, charting unknown regions of space, making first contact with new species, always backed by the unspoken warning: we are peaceful, but we are not harmless. The Krethix Empire slowly rebuilt, their defeat becoming a cornerstone of their new culture. They taught their children about the warnings they ignored, the price of arrogance, the importance of respecting boundaries. Some even became allies of humanity, trading partners who never forgot what happened but chose to move forward anyway. On the Galactic Council station, a new proverb emerged, spoken in 1,000 languages across the stars: there are two types of species in the galaxy. Those who know their limits and those who are human. The wise learn to be both. The warning markers around Sol remained, but new signs were added. Home of humanity. Enter with permission. Depart with knowledge. Respect boundaries. Choose peace. The warnings were no longer about keeping people out but about reminding them why humanity once thought they needed to. Earth's population woke fully over the course of a year. Billions of humans opened their eyes to a galaxy that knew their name, feared their power, but also welcomed their presence. They joined the galactic community not as conquerors but as partners, bringing with them all the complexity that made them human. Their capacity for violence, yes, but also their capacity for compassion, creativity, curiosity, and choice. The Great Sleep was over. Humanity was awake. And the galaxy discovered that the species they feared was also the species that understood fear best, that knew the cost of violence most intimately, that valued peace most desperately because they had experienced its absence most completely. The universe had one rule: don't wake the humans. The Galactic Council broke it and learned a hard lesson. But from that lesson came something unexpected. Not domination, not conquest, not the empire of fear that everyone expected. Instead came partnership, understanding, and a new kind of peace, one built not on ignorance but on full knowledge of what humanity was and what they chose to be. In the end, waking the humans wasn't the galaxy's worst mistake. It was the beginning of something better, something no one had imagined possible. The sleeping giants had awakened, and, instead of destroying the world, they helped rebuild it into something stronger. Dar. Minji closed the archives late one night, looking out at Geneva under starlight that now included ships from 12 different species in orbit. Earth had changed. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed too, though perhaps not as much as they feared. They were still capable of terrible things, but they were choosing better things. Day by day, choice by choice, they were becoming not what they feared they were, but what they hoped they could be. And, somewhere in the darkness between stars, old warning buoys continued their eternal broadcast in dead languages, updated now with a new message: here sleeps humanity. They are awake now. Approach with respect. Depart with friendship. This is not a warning. This is an invitation. Choose wisely.